Are you a busy parent? Do you feel like you're being pulled in multiple directions all at once? Are you exhausted and overwhelmed? Meet my mom. Her name is Tanikella. She's a pediatrician, expert in mind-body medicine, and a life coach. She can help you break free from guilt and overwhelm so that you can enjoy the life that you've worked so hard to create. She can also teach you how to support your family in a more holistic way.
Welcome to the I Am Well MD podcast. Today I have a very special guest, Jordan Grumet, aka Doc G. Jordan Grumet found the spark to become a doctor after a deeply personal event reshaped his life's trajectory. The unexpected loss of his father, an oncologist, ignited a passion within him to practice medicine and instilled a unique vantage point that later melded seamlessly with his financial expertise. This convergence of roles has spurred him to explore profound notions like wealth, abundance, and financial independence with a thoughtful and critical lens. Presently, he serves as an associate medical director at Unity Hospice. With a profound understanding of both medicine and finance, Jordan unveiled his thoughts through blogging, specifically focusing on financial independence and wellness. This passion culminated in the launch of the Earn and Invest podcast in 2018. In August 2022, Jordan's literary pursuit took shape as his book, Taking Stock, a hospice doctor's advice on financial independence, building wealth, and living a regret-free life. His second book, The Purpose Code, was published in January 2025. Jordan's journey intertwines medical insight and financial wisdom, resonating deeply with those seeking a balanced, meaningful life. Welcome, Dr. Jordan Grumet.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm so excited to hear you talk about some of these amazing thoughts and processes that you have gone through. I mean, it sounds like your journey started at a very, very young age as it pertains to coloring your career choices and even how you live your life today. Can you tell us a little bit more about your path?
I thought, for all intents and purposes, I was going to be a physician and that was going to solve all of life problems and fill me up and make me the happiest person ever. That actually stemmed from a trauma. My father died when I was 7. He was an oncologist. He was rounding at the hospital. He had a cerebral aneurysm burst and he died fairly quickly. And being a 7-year-old, I told myself the story that, well, if I just become a doctor like him and walk in his shoes, it's going to cosmically fix this fact that he died. And I was 7, so I thought it had something to do with me. And so this is how I was going to make up for it. And strangely enough, that actually filled me up quite a bit. I thought, okay, I'm going to become a doctor. This is really purposeful. I didn't care about money, didn't care about anything. I just kind of wanted to walk in his footsteps. And it really was joyful until it wasn't, until I became a doctor and realized that I didn't necessarily love the work. I didn't cosmically fix his death by becoming a doctor. He was still gone. I thought I was going to save the world and realized that, as you know, you can't save everybody. And so I very quickly burned out. This big purpose in my life, this audacious goal of both fixing his death and saving everyone, was something I could never attain. And because I could never attain, burnout followed very quickly.
I find that many of us start on our career paths in our early 20s. You started on your career path like at age 7. There's a lot of ambition and energy as we build our futures. Then we get married, we start having kids, we find ourselves buried under the stressors of the day-to-day. And there's this feeling of getting stuck that seems to create misalignment. You know, some of us opt to ignore it, and here you have not just listened to it, but allowed it to become a stepping stone for yourself. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, it wasn't that easy, actually. I mean, there were many years of turmoil where I both realized that I was burning out in medicine, but also realized that I had no idea how to step away. There were financial issues like, do I have enough money to step away? This is the only thing I've ever known how to do for a living. But then there were deeper emotional issues of identity. This is the only identity I had ever known. And not only was I walking away from that, but I was severing this, small connection I still had to my father. What really changed everything is I discovered financial independence. So at the time I was practicing medicine, I was trying to build up enough wealth to leave being a doctor. And I was writing a medical blog, and this guy, Jim Daly, the White Coat Investor, sent me his book called The White Coat Investor and asked me if I would review it for my blog. And at the time, I understood finances and my parents had modeled great behavior, but I didn't really understand things like how much do I need not to do this so full time. So I read his book, understood financial independence, realized I was much better off financially than I thought. And then I could contemplate actually leaving this job that was burning me out. But it still took years. And I didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I didn't walk away completely. I had to use what I call the art of subtraction. I slowly subtracted what I didn't like about the job until I was left with one thing that I loved, which was hospice work. So I owned a practice, I sold it. I was working in a nursing home. I stopped doing that. I was working full time in hospice, and I really went down to doing about 10 or 15 hours a week, getting rid of nights, weekends, call. And the reason I kept doing hospice is it was the thing I would do even if I wasn't being paid for it. So I knew that felt purposeful. But what was really exciting is over those years that I did this, I started freeing up time and space to pursue other things. And I had this inkling that I always wanted to do all these other things. Like I loved writing. I'd been writing a blog kind of in my free time for years. I liked public speaking. Eventually, I discovered podcasting, started a blog about personal finance. So all of these things came about because I finally had the emotional energy as well as the time to start thinking about what lights me up as opposed to what was I tracked into doing that wasn't fitting me.
How did you find the ability to just slash things off your list? I find that sometimes when I look at my life, both my home life, my career, there's a little bit of guilt that goes into, crossing things off. Did you feel any sense of guilt at all, or did you ever have trouble pulling it off your list? Like slashing, yes, I get, we can do that, but actually moving forward with taking it off our day to day.
I think a lot of that depends on why you're feeling guilt. And so I think a lot of people feel guilt because their sense of meaning, the story they tell themselves about themselves, is a story in which doing the thing proves that they're enough, which is funny because they don't feel enough or they wouldn't come to this point of crisis. But yet walking away from that thing still feels difficult. And so there was the sense of I'm walking away from the connection to my father. There was the sense of I'm walking away from the thing that has defined me. And so there was some guilt there. There was some guilt about kind of my family expectations, et cetera. But I had to measure that against the fact that this was not lighting me up, that this was taking me away from my family. I had lost my sense of humor, right? When I went into residency, I was kind of a funny guy who was willing to laugh at almost anything. By the time I got out of residency, I was stressed and anxious and I was working really long hours. And so I started realizing that what I was losing, my sense of humor, my sense of doing things that light me up, and my sense of connection to my work, that the guilt I should be feeling about that was more than the guilt I should be feeling about leaving this profession that was supposed to define me. So I started realizing that my unique gifts as a human being were probably not coming out doing what I was doing. And so that allayed some of the guilt because I'm like, there are things I can do that are more aligned with who I am. And in a sense, probably will connect with more people, make me happier, connect with my family better, make me a better person. And so I think that allayed some of that guilt. But you have to start from a place of feeling you're enough. And so if you became a doctor because you had trauma in your childhood or because your parents convinced you were supposed to do this or because you grew up poor and you're like, this is my safety, if all of those are your reasons for becoming a doctor, you're going to have to deal with those things first before you decide to leave or at least decrease your hours, or that guilt will get you because we as human beings resist change. And if you want a different outcome, you have to do something different to get there, right? So if you're looking at your job and you're like, I'm burned out and I don't love this, I want to live a happier life. So you're going to have to change what you're doing to get that different or better outcome. And we naturally resist change because you're moving from your zone of comfort to a place by definition that's uncomfortable because you've never done it before. And so the guilt is your body and your family and all those stories you've been telling yourself for so long about who you are, trying to stop you from stepping into that uncomfortable place, which is fine if you never want to change. If you are happy with your life and things are working out exactly the way you wanted them, and there's no reason to change, then let those stories take over. But the problem is most of us are having this conversation. They're listening to your podcast right now because they've identified that something isn't working. And so we should expect the guilt. We should expect, I call them demons. We should expect the demons of our past to start screaming a little when we start doing something different. If you don't hear that, then you're probably not doing something sufficiently different enough to get the different outcome you really want.
It's really interesting how you qualify the fact that there will be demons. There will be pushback, whether it's internally or externally, when we start to try to make changes in our life for the better or for what we perceive as the better. I had always wanted to be a doctor from a very young age. What I didn't identify was that I had wanted to become a healer. And at the age of 5, I did not recognize yet that there were different ways to be a healer. The doctor seemed the most obvious and the most ever present in society. And so that was the path that I chose. And then I got to medical school and I was very, very disenchanted. Like, it was that first year grinding through classes, studying at all hours. It was dehumanizing to me. And I couldn't understand how a profession that was meant to help our fellow citizens to live better lives could be so malignant to us from the get-go. And so I sat there with this sort of victim mentality for a long time. When I graduated and I went to residency, I went into a pediatrics residency because kids put a smile on my face. But even coming out of residency and the inhumane hours, the 24 to 30 hour calls and all of that, I came out thinking, gosh, like, there's got to be more. So kind of looking back at this stage, I can say, wow, I got through medical school. I had thoughts of leaving, and I did. I ended up leaving the country for a little while to regain some perspective and came back. And I recognized that, this might be hard right now, but this is not the end all be all. So when I told my peers this, they were all like, what are you talking about? This is the big thing, this is what we're going for. And I was like, yeah, but no, maybe that's just not it for me. So I took this victim role and turned it into a stepping stone for what I was going to be doing in my clinic and in my life. And I have to say that there are a lot of people who don't always have that mentality to be able to look back and recreate their story. So when it comes to that, can you talk a little bit about meaning? Because this piece, I think, is really important to being able to set our future and our present.
So meaning, I define, is cognitively the way we think about our past. It's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, whereas purpose is about the present and future, and it's all about activities, right? So meaning is about thoughts, purpose is about activities. So happy people tend to tell themselves a heroic story about their past. They'll look at their traumas, they'll look at their problems, they'll look at the things that didn't go right, and they'll say, but I was enough, so I got through those things, and I'm likely to get through them in the present and future. Unhappy people tend to tell themselves a victim story. They see their problems, their traumas of the past, and they say something to the extent of, I was thwarted and I was never enough. And so they expect that they won't be enough in their present and future. And so it's very key to happiness to kind of get this sense of meaning right, which means that if you have a victim story that you've been telling yourself forever, you need to go back and rewrite that narrative and find a way to look at it as a heroic story, which is exactly what you did. But here's where those demons lie. Something called neuroplasticity. If you've been telling yourself this victim story for 20 or 30 years, you can't just flip a switch and everything's going to feel good. And so the process of rewriting our neurons with repetition, with visualization, with meditation, all these things where we repeat a new story, a better story, and it takes some time to rewrite those stories. And that's why the demons come back up. That's why even if you're doing something you love, that feeling of guilt all of a sudden arises, that story that you were supposed to do this and you're not doing it, so everything's going to blow up. That story that tries to keep you doing what's comfortable, because within comfort, you don't have to step into that zone of discomfort. And so meaning is very, very important. And where most people get stuck is they have trouble flipping that story. They have trouble going back and reassessing and realizing, well, no, like I wasn't this bad kid who had to prove they were enough. I was just a good kid in a bad situation. And so I endured things because of happenstance or because of the adults around me. And instead of seeing yourself as a victim, realizing, well, for everything I went through, I kind of came out of it okay. Yes, maybe I had the strange idea that I had to be a doctor and maybe that wasn't true, but look at all I've achieved. And when you start flipping that script, it's a lot easier to then go about and say, well, you know what? My sense of purpose was being a doctor, but now I realize that that script probably wasn't right. And I was probably always enough. So I don't have to keep on being a doctor to prove I'm enough because it's not working anyway.
Mm.
And so instead, if I already feel enough and I've told myself a better story, I can just start doing things in the present and future, not because they're going to prove anything, but because that's where I can be my best self and I can do things that light me up. And maybe I can bring my true gifts to the world. And so the story you've now told yourself, a very healthy story, is yeah, I kind of made a mistake. I thought being a doctor was the only way. I went through some bad stuff in residency, but now I realize that actually I was the hero of that story and could pivot to using what I had learned to become the kind of healer I wanted to be, which might mean doing things different. When all my friends were talking about becoming neurosurgeons because they're going to make tons of money and be the kings of the hospital, you're like, I can go into pediatrics because that's where I feel like I can heal the most and be connected to people like kids who light me up. And that may mean other things. That might mean that you do a different type of medicine that other people don't do. That might mean you take some non-medical things and bring them into your medical career. That even might mean at some point you leave medicine to pursue something else. And all of that is fine. It will be fine for you because you've already started telling yourself a much better story. And that story allows you to jump into the unknown without fear because you don't have to prove your enoughness. You're already enough. You already get it. You can just jump through it and enjoy even some of the discomfort of not knowing the outcome.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I do have to say though, I really struggled with finding the enoughness. I'm not gonna lie. I feel like there were some cultural factors in play. There were some
And
career.
those were those stories. I want you to be very clear. So that's generational trauma.
Yeah.
That's the generational stories that you've been told that you're having trouble letting go of because they've been in, neuroplasticity. They have been imprinted into your neurons in your brain. It's really hard to escape those demons. Not impossible, but it's going to cause you to struggle with those demons, which is exactly what you were doing.
Yeah. No, and I feel like I had a lot wanting to prove myself to the world. And really, a lot of that was, my dad was very, very, he always expected more. It really took up until his passing for me to finally felt seen by him. He had wanted to be a doctor. Now, I did not become a physician because he wanted to be a physician and there was a hidden agenda there. No, it truly was because I wanted to help people. In the journey to becoming a physician, there was a lot of, I told you it would be hard.
He was playing out his trauma. I mean, it had nothing to do with you. And see, this is the hard part. Like when you're looking back, this was someone who wanted to become a doctor who was never able to, someone who lost their job, right? We talked about this, I think, before the podcast started, who lost their job and felt a sense of purposelessness. That is the definition of generational trauma. He was taking his version of purpose and his version of loss for not achieving things that he wanted to achieve, and he was plunking it right on your head, little kid or a teenager who had nothing to do with any of that. And what's beautiful, what's wonderful is you coming to terms with this trauma and rewriting your story means that you are not going to pass that on to your own children. So you've taken generational trauma and you're turning it into generational growth, which means your children will see you doing things that light you up, that you're engaged and connected to, and it will give them permission to do the same. Whereas the only permission you got was to overachieve and become a doctor because that was the permission your dad allowed you. But that wasn't it wasn't a fulfilling version of you being lit up. It was you fulfilling some criteria that he had for himself that he was never able to meet, which is where your children hopefully will have the permission to say, mom's out there doing things that light her up. And that's what being an adult looks like, is going out there and find what fits me, what excites me. Maybe that's being a doctor, so I can try on that identity mom has shown me. and it'll either fit and I'll be like, great, this lights me up. But if it doesn't fit, then I can go find a different identity that fills me up, a different version of purposeful activity. And so this is the step we always miss. It's like you not only have to break the generational trauma, but then you have to create the generational growth, which is exactly what you're doing with your own family.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I think too, looking back, and I don't want to be like, oh, woe is me, because really what ended up happening was in the last maybe 5 to 10 years of his life, he had some health problems right when I was about to graduate from residency. And I came to the hospital and I helped him there. And then in 2017, he got sick again, and I was there with him in the hospital. And it was interesting for us to be able to have this shared experience because he was able to see his mortality and also was looking at it from a very scientific eye because he was a cardiac researcher. And here he was with a cardiac issue. So he had a very profound understanding of what was happening to him in his last weeks. But looking at all of that, and even having had some of that experience of talking to him, there was a peace there. And ultimately, after his passing, there was this process of forgiveness that happened, both forgiving him, but also forgiving myself for engaging in these lesser quality emotions at the expense of our relationship. So looking back, I can say, yes, I went through all this with my dad, recognizing that his quiet, stoic encouragement actually helped me to fulfill some level of prosperity and level of success that I may not have had the willingness to do. And again, making this what used to be a negative piece of our relationship into a positive one, and really being able to kind of take a look at my dad and give him like that soulful hug. Like, he's passed, but I'm able to kind of be heart to heart with him, even post-mortem, which is just a beautiful experience. And I don't know that other people get to be so lucky to have that while their parents are alive, let alone once their parents have passed.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be clear. Like, when I say the generational trauma, I'm not saying your dad in any way, shape, or form was a bad person. He probably, again, experienced the same trauma that you did and just didn't know how not to pass it on. And so that's some of that forgiveness. I think, I was listening to an interview with Anderson Cooper, who talks about a lot of his own childhood trauma. And I forgot who he was talking to, but he was talking about this concept of the process of dealing with these traumas is walking with yourself, your former self as a child, and you being the adult you are now, and accepting that child for who they were and forgiving them and forgiving yourself. But I think it's the same process with your father who's now passed, is some of this becoming a better, more connected you and retelling your own stories in a coherent way that makes more sense, is to be able to walk with that former person, whether it be yourself or your father, and see them, connect with them, forgive them, accept them, right? Your father was probably a very loving man who had his own set of demons that were passed on from his own traumas. You were just a good kid that you have to now walk with and accept as imperfect and as a kid is. Like, you don't know you want to work towards being a doctor or all those things when you're a kid. You just want to have fun and do the things you want to do. And so I think that's all part of the process. But what all of this is it's a retelling your story in a much more healthy way. It's a rewriting of that narrative in such a way that it becomes heroic as opposed to traumatic. And I think that's what you continually are doing. And I think that is that key to meaning, to getting that meaning piece right, so that we can move forward in the present and future.
I think too, there's a piece here about happiness, right? We give ourselves meaning. And in your book, The Purpose Code, you talk about meaning plus purpose equals happiness. Tell me more about that piece, because I feel like that's fascinating. And that's really, I'm middle aged now. A lot of my listeners are middle aged. And many of us are at this stage where we're reevaluating our life. You know, some of us are able to apply positive meaning to past traumas in our life, but not all of us. Not all of us are quite there yet. How do you go about adding the purpose piece in reflection of meaning?
So I used to think that purpose was enough. And the problem is, I know a lot of really purposeful people who aren't happy. And I started looking at these people and trying to figure out why. And the why was these were all hyperachievers. They were like the Steve Jobs and the Elon Musks. They had all the money in the world. They had achieved all these amazing things, and yet they didn't look particularly happy. Like when you look at Steve Jobs, he didn't look particularly happy. I mean, he had all sorts of messed up relationships. He didn't recognize his own daughter. People who worked with him said he was difficult and painful to work with. He got ousted from his own company and then had to fight his way back. I mean, these are not the things you think about when you think about a well-integrated, happy person, but he had tons of purpose, but he didn't have what I'd call enoughness. And so that's where the meaning comes in. The problem is your search for feeling enough almost always has to do with your past. It's always about those stories you tell yourself about yourself. And if you can tell yourself a heroic story, you can say that I am enough. I was enough in my past and I'll be enough in my future. But if you don't have that sense of meaning and you just drive into purpose, you'll do what Steve Jobs did, which is he kept on trying to prove his enoughness with purpose. And the problem is you get stuck on this achievement treadmill of getting achievement after achievement, thinking it's going to fill you up. And when you get there, you're happy for a moment or two. And then you're still feeling empty because you still don't feel enough because you haven't dealt with your sense of meaning in your past. And so you just double down and try to find a bigger, better achievement, more purpose. And it just doesn't work. Now, if you look at it the other way, and you deal with your past and you rewrite your narrative and you feel like you are enough, this relieves you of using purpose to prove your enoughness. And so then purpose becomes something very different. It just becomes, what can I do in the present and future that lights me up? What are the activities? And so I would use myself as a perfect example. Before I came to terms with my father and his death and feeling enough and those kind of things, I really wanted to write a book. And if I didn't have a good sense of meaning, I could have jumped into writing a book and I could have published a book and I would have been happy for a moment. But then, well, how many copies did the book sell? Did it make it to the New York Times bestseller list? Do I have a book deal for my next book? All of a sudden, what should have been purposeful and exciting, writing a book, turns into a reason to either believe I'm enough or not. And the problem is you can never purpose your way to enough. No matter how much you achieve, it can never fill the holes and the gaps of your past. You have to go back and understand your own enoughness through your past. I needed to go back and realize my father dying had nothing to do with me. I wasn't a bad kid. I was a good kid in bad circumstances. And how heroically did I still become a healthy adult who achieved becoming a doctor? Incredibly hard thing. Was able to encounter people in their most difficult situations. It improved my ability as a communicator and a storyteller. And yet, heroically, I was able to realize it also probably wasn't the right thing for me and to leave it. That sense of feeling enough allowed me to then dive into the present future, writing books, doing podcasts, public speaking, without worries that if this thing doesn't work, if no one reads my book or I don't get a publisher, it doesn't mean anything except that it didn't happen. But if I enjoy the process of getting there and writing that book and searching for a publisher, it kind of doesn't matter whether you reach a goal or not. And so I think that's how they integrate. You need both. You can't just pursue purpose without a good sense of meaning. And you can't just stick with meaning, but then not in the present future dive into these beautiful, wonderful things that light you up. You need both. But I think if you can manage both, your likelihood of being a happy, intentional person increases quite a bit. And I've been thinking a lot about this lately, which is not in my book. Meaning is about our past and it's how we think about our past, but it also really helps us in our present and future because it grounds us. Right now, we are facing economic difficulties. We're facing political upheaval. You and I both before the podcast were talking about our own family issues and surgeries and health problems. It can feel like the world is going to blow you over. Your sense of meaning is your grounding. It's what allows you to continue moving forward in the present and future with purpose because you feel connected, whether that's to your family or your job or whatever you love. You feel connected to your past. You feel connected to your father and the love he had for you and what he tried to teach you and how it led to your successfulness. When you feel grounded in that sense of meaning, we actually manage turmoil in the present and future much better.
Love this. One of the things that you talked about was purpose anxiety in your book. And I do see a lot of folks struggling with what is purpose? Like, how do I find purpose? What does that even mean? Yeah. When you see somebody who asks you this question, how do you usually answer them?
Well, the first thing I say is you don't find purpose, you build it, right? You create it. So it's a very active process. And the reason why I say that is this idea of finding purpose is anxiety provoking, because what happens is you imbue purpose being this big, audacious, important thing, right? I have to find this thing that makes me famous or makes me lots of money or shows my impact and legacy in the world. And the problem is that causes analysis paralysis because we get so caught up in some type of goal that's supposed to change the world or be big and audacious that it makes us feel anxious. And a lot of people can't figure out what that is. And so they feel lost. They feel like there is no purpose. I try to turn it around and I say, well, purpose are the activities you do in the present future that light you up. So you don't find purpose, you build it. But it is true, you have to have these inklings, these beckonings, these things that excite you or light you up. Those are called purpose anchors. And so the way to deal with anxiety is stop worrying about impact legacy, stop worrying about goals, stop worrying about this big, audacious version of purpose that's going to change the world. And instead, let's start thinking about the little things that light you up. And here's where you have agency. Once you figure out those things, it is up to you to build a life of purpose around them. But that's really abundant. Like when we think about that big, audacious purpose that's going to prove something that's really goal oriented, it's very scarcity mindset oriented because you're like, well, I have to make $1 million, or I have to be partner in my practice, or I have to, become president of the United States. These are kind of scarcity mindset oriented goals because only a few people can get there and everyone else fails. And so you're setting yourself up to be a little bit anxious. But what if you turn that around and you say, well, I have an inkling, a beckoning that being a healer is important to me. And so you're like, that's my purpose anchor. Well, what are the million things I could do to become a healer? I could study yoga. I could become a massage therapist. I could be a doctor, but we could focus on pediatric patients who've gone through trauma. I could write a blog about being a healer as a doctor. Otherwise, I could do a podcast. I could join the United National Healers Association of America or whatever there is. Like, think about all the millions of things you could do, all these activities you could build around this anchor of healing. And then all of a sudden it starts feeling much easier. Like instead of feeling anxiety, I start feeling purposes everywhere around me. And there are a million ways I can pursue it. But I am going to have to do some work. But work is good because that's within our hands. Like I can choose to do these things. And that's how we really start allaying that anxiety and start making purpose something joyful. Like this is not supposed to be hard. It's not supposed to be painful. It's actually supposed to be joyful and almost innate. Like look at kids, little kids, especially before the ages of phones and computers. So I'm speaking from an 80s mindset here, right? Not from a 2020 mindset, but look at kids. If you throw them outside and say you have the whole day, do whatever you want, they'll ride their bikes all day, or they'll build a fort, or they'll go onto the basketball court and play all day. They'll forget what they're doing. They'll forget dinner. They'll come home late. Kids understand purpose because it's not imbued with these big goals of I need to change the world or I need to make lots of money. A lot of times it's like, what can I do that's really fun today? We lose that as we get older, as society tells us who we're supposed to be. And as we get all these rules about what we're supposed to do, purpose shouldn't be that anxiety provoking. It should just be like, hey, when you were a kid, what would you do to enjoy the day? Why instead as adults, can't we do the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true. So you spoke of two things here. There's the purpose that is very linear, driven in ambition. And then there's the purpose of just personal enjoyment, like feelings of wholeness, feelings of connectedness. that almost can be inserted into any part of our day if we're intentional or conscious of it. And we can bring more of it into our lives if we plan for it. And sometimes it plops into our lap unexpectedly. So I think that's so interesting that there's these two different types of purpose here. And maybe it's not just a black and white purpose. There's many different shades of gray, or if you will, all sorts of shades of the rainbow, you know.
I call them big P purpose and little P purpose. Big P purpose, really the big part about it is it's goal oriented, whereas little P purpose is process oriented. And I really am trying to argue that we should not base our purpose on goals. I think we need to be more goal agnostic. What does that mean? That means that you can have goals while pursuing little P purpose, but you have to enjoy the process. And whether you hit the goal or not has to be less important than enjoying the process of what you're doing. I think that's really the big differentiator. And I think purpose anxiety almost always comes from big P purpose and very rarely comes from little P purpose. And ultimately, and this is what really surprises people, I actually think we have more impact, more legacy, and less burnout when we go after little P purpose than when we go after big P purpose, which is counterintuitive because people think of big P purpose as big and audacious, like I'm going to change the world. Most of the time you actually don't get there, you burn out before you get there. But with little P purpose, we do things that light us up. We're much more likely to connect with other people and change things.
I agree. I think though, like for me, and this is my personal process, is I definitely encountered burnout very early in my physician career. And the way I solved for that was, again, unexpected. I happened to go to a yoga class at home when I was on break from school. And this woman was also in medical school, introduced me to, back then it was the American Medical Student Association Humanism in Medicine group. She's like, hey, look, we're going to be going to this conference in a couple of months. You should come. I think you would really enjoy it. And of course, I dismissed it. I looked at the website. Then I dismissed it again. And I was like, nope, too much money, can't afford it, poor student. And I was like, but then these other students can afford it. Like, all right, you know what? I can cough up $200 and go. And it was life-changing. It really was. It put me into a community of physicians who I felt like were like me. Like I felt like an imposter in my own community at my medical school. Like I was a hippie wearing a short white coat in med school. And here I was surrounded by other people who thought in a similar fashion to me that there was this holistic part of medicine that was severely lacking. And it spurred me on to travel the world and look for other ways in which medicine or healing could be expanded. And that is ultimately what I brought into my career now 10 to 15 years later, is this very holistic viewpoint with lots of other ways to be able to achieve good or better results than just conventional medicine alone. So it's almost like this merging happened for me where there was big P purpose and little P purpose was an offshoot and then came back in and realigned. And it was a very interesting observation as I was reading your book. I was like, oh, this did happen for me.
Yeah. And in the parlance of my terminology, so what happened is medicine for you is big P purpose. It was based on this idea that you're going to live up to your family expectations, to your own expectations of what you're going to be. That burnt you out because it wasn't deeply fulfilling. You didn't enjoy the process of doing it. It was very goal oriented. And so you took your interest in healing, little P purpose, purpose anchor, and then built activities around that purpose anchor, including getting involved in AMPS's humanism in medicine. And you doing things that lit you up, connected you to other people, which automatically leads to happiness, but also led to more activities around this little P purpose that eventually became your career. That's it. That's the template. We want more and more of that, and less of the holding on to the big P purpose that isn't fulfilling us and riding that to your death, which makes a lot of people unhappy.
So there's another thing that you mentioned too that I kind of wanted to ask about, and that was money, right? Like so many of us become doctors because, back then it was like the career where you can make a lot of money. That's for some for some specialties, that's not necessarily true. I speak lovingly because pediatrics is at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to, being able to.
General internal medicine too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I feel like a lot of a lot of people focus on financial wealth and wealth creation as they think it's a little p purpose. How would you, like being a guru when it comes to finances, how would you comment on that?
Well, the question really is simple. Money for what? Financial wealth for what? Money is a great tool and it can allow you to live a life full of purpose doing the things you want to do, but it's a horrible goal. So if money is your goal, what are you using it for? Because all money is a made-up construct. It's basically, a holder of goods and services. It's potential energy, right? You provide goods and services, someone pays you. You don't barter, you actually have a holder of goods and services, which is money, and then you can then use that money to get goods and services from other people to live the life you want to live. And so you're striving to having lots of a tool but never using that tool to do what it was meant to do, which is help you live a more purposeful, happy life. Look, no one, and I'm a hospice doctor, so I deal with people a lot on their deathbeds. No one says, I wish I made more money. No one. No one says, I wish I worked more nights and weekends. They almost always say, I wish I had the courage to do the things that were important to me. And that's a good use of your money. Use your money to become a better version of yourself, to do the things that excite you and light you up. Other than that, it's useless. It's either useless pieces of paper or useless digits on a computer somewhere. If you have no money, money feels like everything because you need to eat and you need shelter. But none of us who are listening to this right there are at that place. So otherwise, the whole purpose of money is to allow you to do what you want, to become the best you can, to connect with the most people and to be happy. And so if that's your goal, is to have a lot of money, I think you're just missing the point.
I think this piece is important. Like, I started my journey into becoming a life coach around the time that COVID hit because I had started to have this loss of meaning in my life, loss of purpose. During COVID, when I was facing my own mortality as a frontline worker, I was recognizing that there are so many other people who didn't have this background. So anybody could be a pediatrician, but here I was, and I had this additional piece to offer. And so this is how I offered it, was by creating a community that I can coach and this podcast ultimately. When faced with one's own mortality, you mentioned your hospice patients aren't worried about how much they made. They don't regret not having worked nights and weekends. What did they wish they had done more of?
I mean, they regret that they never had the energy, courage, or time to become a better version of themselves, whether that's connecting with the people who are important to them or doing the things that were deeply important to them. And so we tend to put off things that are important to us because they're scary. We say we don't have enough time, we don't have enough money. I'll put off writing that book till next year, till next month, till I have more time. And the days turn into weeks, turn into years, and all of a sudden you find yourself on your deathbed never having done that thing that was important to you. And so it really has to do with each person. So what are those things? It has to do with their purpose anchors. What are your purpose anchors, and did you pursue them? If you didn't, you will regret it one day. But for each person, since we all have different purpose anchors, we're going to regret different specific activities. But they all boil down to, I could have been a better version of myself doing things that were more important to me, and I didn't. And like I say, people often say they don't have enough money, but I'll tell you, there are plenty of places where people have very little money and they live very happy lives. And so I don't think money is the issue. And there are plenty of studies that show that it isn't money that's connected to happiness. It's more interpersonal connections. So they say they don't have enough time, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics does the American Time survey every few years and shows that your average person has 4.5 to 5 hours of free time a day. So it's not money and it's not time, it's courage. Most of us don't have the courage to do the things that are deeply important to us. And so it behooves us to start doing those things now, unless you want to one day have regret.
I love that. The other day I was telling my son, courage doesn't mean that you're brave and that you don't feel fear. Courage is feeling fear and doing it anyway. You're doing it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of the Roosevelt arena speech. I'm sure you're familiar with it. This idea that we should be fighting the good fight as opposed to the spectator commentating on fighting the good fight. I mean, I think human beings tend to be happiest not when they're achieving or succeeding, but when they're in the midst of the arena, beaten up, sweaty, in pain, barely lifting their head. I think that's life. I think that's when we're most happy, is when we are just like striving for something deeply important to us and feeling in the midst of the hardest battle of our life. I mean, I think that's the courage. We all have fear. We all are afraid we're not going to succeed. We all are afraid that these deeply important things will never reach. But I will tell you, and this is something I've also learned from the dying, people generally don't regret not achieving the important thing. They regret not trying.
Hmm.
And so here's the thing. You want to be in the arena gutting it out, but it almost doesn't matter if you actually win or not. In fact, I would argue that sometimes getting to the achievement is not nearly as happy as being in the midst of the big important fight. And so I always tell people some of my happiest times in my life were actually in getting into medical school and that beginning jubilation of studying medicine. That was much more happy for me than actually being a practicing doctor. I laugh about this, but I tell my kids, may you never reach your goals. May you get 95% of the way there. Because I love this feeling of being on your way to being something important or doing something big. I found that I actually enjoy being in the arena more than standing on the winner's podium.
Yeah, I could see that. I can relate to, enjoying the journey more so or equally to the destination, right? And I think for many of us who are high achievers, our focus is so laser sharp on the end point. We're looking to go from point A to point Z, no no interruption in between. But in fact, those interruptions and that climb, if you will, is what really brings the flavor, the joy, the interest, the color. And I think for many of us, and I would say career moms, we look at our careers and sometimes, and there's some guilt in saying this, and I know other mothers have felt the same way. Sometimes when our kids come up, they're vomiting first thing in the morning, and we're getting dressed, and we're like, okay, we're taking the day off of work today. But I had a full panel of patients or whatever it is, right? Like I was supposed to give a presentation. Okay, we're going to put that on hold. And what's replaced is, okay, after you've pulled your child's hair back and they're done vomiting, is you snuggle up with them, and it's those quiet moments of, okay, we went off track. This wasn't part of the plan for today, but I'm appreciating that I'm here with my child and able to help him or her, or, cuddling with them, and hopefully I won't vomit tomorrow, but like, there's that joy there. There's that quietude in such a sense. And to me, that speaks a lot to the purpose for me of motherhood. Like I've always wanted to become a mother. Sometimes career and parenthood can come in conflict with one another, but sometimes it depends on your perspective, it creates this balance. It forces us to create balance. So no, I really love the way you explained purpose in these different ways and talked about that climb, that fight.
And I think this gets back to that other thing I was talking about, which is groundedness. When you have a good sense of meaning, you can feel grounded in these moments when things don't go the way you expect them to, when you even have to put purpose on hold, right? Like you have all these purposeful things in your life and purpose starts not going well and you're in the arena and you're getting beat up and you're struggling. That's where you go back to meaning and groundedness. You become grounded in the sense of meaning in your family and your kids and your connectedness. And that's what turns being in the arena and being in the good fight, it makes it reasonable, makes it possible, makes it bearable and sustainable. Because otherwise, we're just getting beat up all the time.
I was thinking about how we look at life in a malignant fashion and whether I would use the word fight necessarily. But yeah, it's that It's that little bit of friction that really creates the pearl there, right?
Yeah, little p purpose doesn't have to be easy. I always say it's abundant. Um, but we were meant to do hard things. Hard things have friction. Like, so little p purpose can be difficult and painful and hard. You can be in the arena. And yet I still think that that's what a good life feels like. I don't think they contradict each other.
Love it. It's a very different perspective from like what I have heard from other speakers, and I really like this because I think that's where we get a little too comfortable, is we think purpose sometimes has to be comfortable, and it doesn't.
It isn't for me, man. I write books, and every time I start writing a book, it's so many ups and downs, so many failures, so many being turned down by this publisher and that publisher, so many writing a chapter that doesn't work.
Mm.
This is deeply hard work. Now, I happen to love it. There is no more time than I am more in a flow state or lit up than when I'm writing. Um, but it ain't easy. It's being in the arena. It's fighting the good fight. And sometimes I'm getting beat up pretty good.
Once your book is published and it's out in people's hands, how do you feel about that? Like once you've overcome the publishing difficulties, what's that like for you?
Strangely enough, since I've become more and more goal agnostic, I don't see much of a difference because I'm in love with the process. So for me, it's filling my time with doing this purposeful, joyful writing, which is little p purpose for me. Once we hit that part and the book's published, it's doing this marketing and having these wonderful conversations with people like you. And then it's usually to the next project. And so the truth of the matter is, I've really started to try to separate myself from the cyclical nature of these things, because when I think about the cyclical nature, I get back to more things like the achievement treadmill. And instead, I try to consistently be the person I want to be, which is not cyclic in nature at all, but tends to be much more of a straight line. And so by living through my little p purpose and doing these things that are deeply important to me, it loses some of that up and down, both at the highs of like reaching this achievement you're really excited about and the lows of not getting there or being too stuck in the middle. I concentrate more on staying and being the person I want to be, which again feels much more flat. That works more for me. I don't know if it does for everyone else.
And for you, is it just the process of writing that gives you a feeling of purpose, or is it what people may take away from it in the end?
I think it's all of it. I think it's so I love the writing, but then I love getting out there and talking about it. I love building the new ideas. So again, I don't see it as cyclical. So when I'm writing a book, I'm in the content creation period. But then when you're going out and you're talking to other people about it, like you're building up that content, creating new ideas, and almost starting to write that next book because it's spurring new thoughts, spurring new ideas. And so when I wrote the purpose code, my ideas, for instance, about meaning were evolving. But because I've been out there marketing the purpose code, I've developed a whole new set of ideas around meaning, around something called the rosebud phenomenon, around grounding. And so all of those are becoming fodder, hopefully, for my next book. And so again, I kind of see it as a continuous process.
It almost sounds like for those of us who are not as literary, for perhaps some of us who are on social media, like putting out a post that is meaningful to you and letting go of the outcome where you're not checking in an hour to see how many likes you get. It's being able to put something that is thoughtful to you out into the world. Is that a fair comparison?
It is. And as long as I enjoy the process of doing it and hopefully enjoy what comes from it one way or another, then it continues to be little p purpose, process-oriented purpose that lights me up. And if I do that right, it's going to connect me to other people. Certain people are going to be like, I love this idea. Let's work on something together. Or other people are going to be like, dude, you could really teach me something. Let's jump on and do a podcast. And so what happens is you get that collaboration. It connects you to other people. And ultimately, I think that's where happiness really lies, is the people. So do things that light you up, get into that flow state, enjoy the process of doing them. And that's what leads, I think, ultimately to better connections, more happiness, even more little p purpose.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Grumet, for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And there we have it, folks. Dr. Jordan Grumet. For those of you who are interested in learning more about him and his journey, visit him at jordangrumet.com. His website will be in the show notes for your reference. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Hey, if you like what you're hearing, give this podcast a 5-star rating and share it with your friends and family. If you want to learn more about my mom and what she does, visit her at iamwellmd.com and subscribe to her email list. If you leave her a comment, you might just get a shout out in her next podcast episode. If you'd like coaching or support, she has programs available for you and your whole family. My mom is a great pediatrician and a great person, and I hope you like her podcast episodes. Have a great day. Bye.